Hello, and welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we explore the intersections of horror film and feminism. This is Anna, co founder of the Final Girls and your podcast host. Over the next few months, we'll be tracing the lineage of monsters in horror cinema. In each episode, I'm joined by a special guest to dive deep into a different monster movie. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a double bill of 1980s weirdness: Paul Schrader's Cat People from 1982 and the frat horror comedy Vamp from 1986. First, we'll tackle Cat People, a very loose remake of the 1942 film of the same name, which we covered on a podcast as well in the very first episode of this season, but this is a beast of a very different kind. In this version, which was billed as an erotic horror, whatever that means, we meet our protagonist Irina, who has a dark family secret that resurfaces dramatically when she reconnects with her estranged brother Paul. Living with him in New Orleans, Irina finds herself falling for zoologist Oliver Yates, even as her brother makes his own advances towards her. It gets real weird. In the second part of the episode, we're going to be chatting about Vamp, where two college students want to hire a stripper to buy their way into a campus fraternity, but unknowingly stumble into a layer of vampires, led by the high-concept art stripper vampire queen Katrina, played by the one and only Grace Jones. I'm joined in this episode by horror film writer and filmmaker Zena, who's the editor-in-chief of Real Queen of Horror. We chat about the weird beauty of Cat People, how it's not really a remake, how Vamp fits into 1980s horror, our love for Grace Jones, and her incredible performance in Vamp. As with all of our episodes, we go into spoilerific detail pretty much from the beginning, so if you haven't seen either film and you want to remain unspoiled, watch them first and then come back to this episode. Zena, thank you so much for joining me and for making the time to talk about these two extraordinary 80s films.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm so excited. Like I was telling you before previously, like I had a hard time, even going back and rewatching them. It's like, I don't know if this ever happens to you before. I'm just going to tell you a little short story. Sometimes when you like rewatch a movie and then you feel the need to like pause it and then go back some more. You know what I mean? You're like
Yeah.
pausing like every 10 minutes or so.
And did you have to do that with these movies?
Yes, I needed to do it. I just
Oh my
had a
God.
great time.
Oh, great. That's so good to hear. So, we're going to be talking about Cat People, the 1982 version, not the 40s version, which we covered in a previous episode of the podcast, and Vamp from 1986. So, let's start with Cat People.
I didn't think you were ready, but you are. I knew it when I saw you with him. Your whole body burns. Make love with me.
I'm not like you.
You can't escape the nightmare without me, and I can't escape without you.
I'm not like you.
So this is a remake from the 1942 film of the same name. And to kick off, can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the film? Had you seen it before, or was this your first time watching it?
This was actually like my first time fully watching it. And it was like a long time ago, actually, because I remember I watched the 1942 version. And I was just
Mm,
so like, I'm still in love with it. I was just very much in love with the movie. I thought it was just perfection. And even like the cinematography, the fashion, I love the dialogue. I loved the character Irina, especially when she said that she liked the dark.
Mm-hmm.
It's friendly. Like, oh my God, who are you? Right. But
Yes.
with this version, I was curious about, and I have no idea why I didn't watch it. It's not that I was trying
Mm.
to avoid it, because I would see like bits and pieces of it, and I thought that it looked beautiful. But it was this was
Mm.
actually like my first time fully watching the movie, and from the start, from the opening, it's like, where has this movie been all my life? I wish that I would have watched it sooner. Like everything about it, I'm just so in love with it. I feel like it's bizarre, but it's still, even though it's an older movie, it's still very current, you know?
Two questions there. So, what did you love about it, and what do you think kind of makes it so current?
So I really love the okay, visually I feel like it's beautiful. I love like the playing with the lighting, with the different colors. I feel like it's just
Mm.
like the sets are so like they really just go into details with the set design. And I know that sounds like
Mm-hmm.
simple, like, oh, there's some movies that do that, but it's just like I don't know about you. I used to watch like a lot of movies from the 80s. And I feel like this one,
Mm-hmm.
it's different from those 80s movies. And I feel like even with the color palette, I feel like you can even compare it to some of Dario Argento's, you know? And
Interesting.
I feel like even with that as an example, with the blood, there's nudity, there's blood, but I
Mm.
feel like it's done very tastefully. And one scene I feel that really stood out for me when there was blood running down Irina's shoe and like it went down the drain. And it reminded me of Alfred Hitchcock's like Psycho, right? So it's just like it's like
Yes.
whoa, it was just amazing. Like I really love that. It's like on the outside you think that this is going to be kind of like a psychological horror dealing with animals and stuff like that, and what a surprise. And why I feel like it's still current, the music. The
Oh.
music is just it's so moody but tasteful. And David,
Mm.
Bowie, obviously he's everything, but it's just I felt like it
Yes.
fit. See, you understand me. I feel like it just fit the film perfectly. I feel like it fit even with today's time with the music. It's just intriguing. It's just a story that I feel is that we kind of seen before, minus the the animal part. But with a brother and sister, they have a weird relationship. They're in this weird, cool yet cool looking house. It's just a very bizarre story, I feel. And what's funny is I know that this is considered a remake, and I too was guilty, I feel, of considering it a remake. But I feel like it's perhaps it even should have been called something else, because I feel like it's a movie
Mm.
that could stand on its own.
I couldn't agree more. And like before I expand on that point, I just wanted to mention I literally when I gasped when you mentioned the shot about the blood running down the drain around Irina's feet and her kind of pastel sandals, I've literally taken a screenshot of that
Yeah.
moment of the film because I remember rewatching it last night and thinking, gosh, that's such a beautiful and horrific image. And it is such a
Right.
stunningly shot film. Like it kind of this is from 82, so this is kind of just around before the explosion of like erotic thrillers
Right.
in American cinema especially. And kind of it's an erotic horror, which is a strange combo that I don't think I've seen that much of. Like that's the way that kind of Paul Schrader described it. I was like, oh, okay, so you're gonna terrify us but also titillate us. Cool. But yeah, that shot is unbelievably gorgeous. And there's so many shots that are both horrifying but still so gorgeous to look at. And kind of a lot of the way that the film uses kind of mood lighting. They're both in nature, but then in the big bustly city, and they're surrounded by kind of concrete and these very cold environments. But then the whole thing is about their physicality and their kind of animal instincts. And
Right.
I wanted to pick you up on this idea of the remake because it does feel a little bit simple almost to talk about it as a straight remake. It kind of reminds me of Argento's Suspiria with Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. They share the same name.
Right.
share the same sort of basic premise, but they are very, and there's a couple of scenes that are kind of remade, but they do feel like entirely different films. So how do you feel, how would you think that this kind of takes the basic idea of cat people and updates it and makes it its own?
Well, I like the fact that, Irina's name, her first name is the same. And even with her background
Mm,
story, it's kind of similar, and even with her going to the zoo and falling in love with a man named Oliver. So that's cool. But I
mm,
feel like this Irina, she seems more independent. She doesn't seem
mm,
um she seems more powerful, if that makes sense. Like she's very much
mm-hmm,
aware of herself. And it's not like she's walking around kind of meek. Not that I felt that the 1942 Irina that she was kind of meek, but sometimes it was like she was
mm,
very unsure of herself. But I feel with this
mm-hmm.
Irina, she just seems like an updated modern one. And I think that's to me what really stood out. Like I just feel like this one again, like it's just I feel like a
Mm-hmm.
movie of its own because it even has its own like storyline. It seems like it even has like its own goals, like had its own goals for itself. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And
yeah.
I love kind of like playing off what you said, where they'll be in nature, but then they're in the city, the hustle and the bustle of the city. I love that they are in New Orleans. I feel like that is such an awesome space to be because there's a lot of weirdness going on, and that kind of fits with the movie as to why, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you think they like, and I'll be honest, I love New Orleans, but I totally forgotten that. I think because I saw this movie for the first time when I was a little bit maybe too young and I probably didn't get a lot of it. I just remember certain
Right.
images and I'd forgotten that it was set in New Orleans. So kind of how do you think the weirdness of the city plays into the weirdness of the film?
Well, as an example, when she goes to the bar with the redhead,
Alice, same as in the 1942 one.
yes, when she goes to the bar and this woman, she says a word that starts with an M, and she was just as confused. And they don't even though it was
Mm,
very odd, it wasn't like sometimes when you're watching a movie and there has to be that that designated weirdo person who says something and people are just like, what does that mean?
yeah.
But with this one, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, go on with your story, because they're kind of like they're used to that type of behavior. Not only not only that, even when she was on kind of like the train ride or the bus ride when she was going, just doing some tourist
Yeah.
sightseeing and everything like that, there was just a man just staring at her. And I mean, men are weird sometimes, but I just felt like that actually just fit with it, like there was,
Mm,
I don't know, I feel like that kind of like showed us that. But then on top of that, even though they were in the city, and then when they did go more into nature and stuff like that, it was more like the swamps. So, and when I think about New Orleans as an example, of course
mm,
there's like the downtown area, but there's also like swampland. And I felt like
mm.
even with her being out there, and it was just so eerie and weird and wild.
And it felt like there's always something kind of going on. Like it's a city that always kind of makes me think, and the reason why I feel like I'm so attracted to it, especially in fiction, it's like there's always something happening. Like there will always be something
Right.
going on in a hotel or in a bar or in the swamps or kind of in a house somewhere that's sort of hidden by all of these trees. Like it always feels like it's never entirely asleep. Like there's always weirdness or something a little bit esoteric kind of going on. And the fact that Oliver kind of accepts the fact that Irina might be a werecat or like a panther woman
Hmm.
is also a bit like, well, maybe they're just, kind of it's more embracing of the weird.
Right.
I don't know if this might be.
Oliver. Oh, that is so true. He was totally fine with her being like a weird cat. Like he did
Mm.
not mind. I mean, I guess, but I mean that's kind of, to me, that would have had me running for the hills. But that's just me.
Maybe that's like the 80s.
I I was actually, thinking about like the relationship, Irina that she had with her brother, Paul. And,
Yes.
I just at first, obviously as the viewer, you know that there's something weird going on between the two and everything like that. But
Mm-hmm.
when he was trying to like sleep with his sister, it's just like, all right, this is getting out of hand.
Yeah.
And it was so messy. It went from like carefree to like, oh, I'm just going to explore, New Orleans, gonna stop at the zoo, and then next thing her brother is just being weird.
What did you think of the I was literally about to ask you kind of what did you make about their relationship, but what did you think especially about their performances, like Nastasha Kinski and Malcolm McDowell who plays Paul?
Oh man, I feel like they did an amazing job. I felt like it, the woman who played Irina, like I felt that I really did believe her. And I know it's just like it's as simple as that with acting, but I know you understand like where it's like if you watch a
Mm,
movie and you can kind of see like, yeah, that's not, you're not selling me. I really did felt that she was like really confused. She was confused
mm,
on, just who she was, where her family came from, what she was going to do. Should
mm,
she stay with Paul? Maybe he's right. Maybe Paul's right. So I really loved her performance. And, Malcolm McDowell, he's just always blowing people out the water with his amazing performance. So it was really great seeing him. But I
mm,
do feel like I love the fact that with the even though like everyone I felt did like a great performance, but in a way
mm.
I feel like it was just such an odd but great lineup of actors.
Totally. And I think it's like there's something slightly off about both Nastasha Kinski and Malcolm McDowell, like not in the sense that they're weird people, in the sense that like they're both kind of very beautiful, but just slightly, not conventionally beautiful in some ways, if you
Right.
know what I mean. And then like the relationship between them as well. It's always like, oh, are we friends? Are we family? And Paul is hitting on his sister kind of, but even from the very first moment we meet them, when we don't really know what the relationship between them is, and then they go off and have their separate encounters and stuff, and all of that is always sort of tinged with this weird oppressive feeling, like they're sort of presenting themselves as one thing, but then actually there's so much more behind the scenes going on. And the way that they move, like physically, I found really interesting. The scenes
Hmm.
where they're kind of cat like when Paul sort of jumps on the
Yes.
bed like a cat and he watches his sister sleep, which cats do all the time, and it's weird. It's weird when it's a cat. It's even weirder when it's a grown ass man. So, how do you think? How do you think they sort of played with this idea of these two characters, sort of like even in their human form, having these like were cat, elements to them?
I loved it. I thought it was just the perfect amount. Like it wasn't too much where it would have become more like cheesy. So
Mm.
like even with the jumping with there was a scene where Paul is kind of like shaking his head kind of like a cat. And it fit. It was weird, but it's like it fit. Like it wasn't like I was like, what is happening? Sometimes when you watch something, it's just like you just want to cut it off. I was
Yeah.
intrigued. I was intrigued with with him, with Irina. Like I wanted to know more about their people, and then
Mm.
even like again when I was saying to you earlier, just like oh man, when the movie first started, I I was like hooked because that dreamy like desert type
Yes.
of sequence, like whatever was happening there, like I really want to know more. Like I would love to learn more about their people, cat werewolf people,
The cat people.
your cat people.
One of the like I think I remember the dreamy sequences more than anything else. What do you think about this extra backstory of kind of explaining all of this world where they have to have incestuous relationships or they will kill? Because it like in the we mentioned that it's sort of unfair to compare it to the 1942 version, but it's almost inevitable. But I remember
Right.
with the 1942 version, which I love, this idea. It's like, no, but I want to know the legend of the cat people. I want to know why you're so afraid. And this movie kind of creates all that extra world building. What did you make of kind of the legend aspect of the film?
I thought it was really interesting. I mean, it is, it's gross, but I get it. It has like a it has like that's why I could see like Irina, like she was really confused, like, oh man, what am I gonna
Mm,
do? And he, Paul said like, if you want, I'm gonna kill again unless you sleep with me. Like it was
yeah.
just like, whoa, like, and it wasn't like he was trying to make her. It's just kind of like I think that she needed to see for herself, and
Mm,
because this is who she is, so she couldn't avoid it. And I think that obviously in the beginning she probably thought that that's something that she could have done, and that she's not like him, but that's who she is, that's where she comes from. But I really do, I think that their backstory is very interesting, and honestly I would want to know more of it. Like it was cool seeing them
mm,
in modern times, but I would love to see like a dreamy type of movie in the desert or wherever their people are, just more of a backstory. Like how did this, like I know that Paul explained it, but
mm.
I just kind of I would like to see it more.
Yes. Yes, I know what you mean. What do you make of the horror elements of it, and like specifically transformations of Paul and Irina into werecats? They're like very out there.
They are, they are. And I was actually going to ask you this, but you beat me to it. um I feel like it's the perfect amount of like horror. And I mean,
Mm,
because sometimes there can be too much blood, I feel. I think blood
yeah.
is cool. I know that sounds a little weird, but it's like there could be too much blood where it's just like, okay, where's the storyline? What's the purpose of this?
Mm-hmm.
But with this, I feel like, especially like with the transformation, this is how I would think that it is. And I've noticed like not a lot of movies, like you don't see this with a lot of movies. So when Paul is finally no more, and Oliver decides to, open up the cat and see what's in there because he knows,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, not only was that sound effect and like the steam before that happened, when you could see like a human hand curled up in there, I would have been in there screaming because,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
that's, can you imagine? Like, and obviously he worked at the zoo, obviously for a long time. He's seen it all, but he's never seen
Mm,
something like this before.
I know. And there's also like there's this really interesting thing about the film where it's like the panther kind of comes out of them, so kind of like rips through their
Right.
skin, which I found so visceral, especially with Irina, because we see her literally like her skin burst and this cat come out. And then at the same time, then when Paul is gone, there's this idea of like the human bit of them is trapped within this big cat. Both of those are equally terrifying and gross to see. But I also, it sounds weird, but I'm a cat person. I don't want to see this, but also, how would this work? Because they're making something that on paper sounds ridiculous actually quite terrifying to watch.
And I feel like I'm a cat person as well, but seeing I was always just curious, and it's like, who thinks about this stuff? I don't know, but I was always just curious to see how how it would work out.
Yeah.
How are they gonna make this work? And just the fact that it's still like grosses you out, you know, in this time, even though it was made in 1982. I feel like that means the world. Like they were clearly doing something
Mm.
right.
Oh yeah, I find like those. Do you like those transformation scenes in general in movies? Like they're especially common in like werewolf movies.
Um, Not so much. Some Just being honest, like I feel like that could be it
Mm,
because sometimes they can be very cheesy. So if done right,
mm,
then yes. And I know, like even when I'm thinking about An American Werewolf in London, I love that movie, but even with that transformation,
mm-hmm,
I mean, I think it looks gross, but in some ways there's a little bit of cheese to it, which I don't mind. It's a
mm,
classic, but I'm not always the biggest fan. So even with I agree
mm-hmm,
with you with this transformation. for the 1982 version, like how it was like popping out of their skin. Like you could see like the fur,
Mm.
on the hands and stuff. It's gross, but you can't look away.
Yeah. And I think it's like, I mean, I have to say, I did find like the scene where Paul's paw is popping out of his fist a bit a bit cheesy. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's almost cute. But uh which I guess is, it says very weird things about me. But I did like the fact that these two actors, McDowell and Kingsky, also kind of look a little bit like feline, like their faces
Right.
work so well, even with very minimal sort of special effects or makeup. I don't know about you, but I found it like it really added to the idea that they would, transform into these massive cats.
I agree. I especially see it, in Kinski's and in her face. Like there'll just be times
Mm.
when it's like it's just a regular day and she's just looking off somewhere, and there is definitely something about it. So
And to start rounding up the conversation around cat people, what did you make of the ending in this one?
I thought it was kind of sad. It just seems like she didn't want to live like her brother, which is understandable. And she ultimately did let not Paul, she did let Oliver go. And
Mm-hmm.
knowing what that means, like with him being with Alice, but it seemed like Alice always wanted to be with Oliver.
Yeah.
Even though it's like Oliver still was very much, I feel, in love with her, but he kind of just settled for Alice. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I thought it was kind of sad, and I don't know, I'm wondering, maybe there could have been like a different way. Maybe they could have been together. They could have done it in a more neater way, other than, this sounds evil, but other than the way her brother did it, with his basement and all.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
about you?
I did feel a little bit disappointed by the fact that, in so many ways, this film is kind of about like exploring the idea of like a woman's desire and her
Right.
sexuality, and to have her like end up in a cage, like literally
Yeah.
in a cage. It's probably the thing that kind of the only thing that disappointed me about rewatching the film, the idea that Irina
Mm.
needs to end up caged and sort of tamed by, because she cannot control, or she's told that she cannot control her desires and she cannot find a
Right.
way to live her life and have a sex life and not murder people. So kind of this, and seeing Oliver and being petted by him at the end when she's sort of completely docile, I was like, oh no, you should be running free. you
Right.
should
She
you
should
should be
be.
out there.
Where was she gonna go? Richmond?
I don't know. Like she could be out there like hunting rabbits. I like living her best life in
Right.
the woods. Maybe.
I mean, I think that would have been better.
I think
It
so
would have been
too.
better. Just let Oliver go. Yeah.
Would you recommend this film for contemporary horror fans?
I would. I think that it was very enjoyable, even for myself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's just sometimes I notice with the first film from 1942.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people, they don't like watching older movies, especially if it's black and white, as an example. I feel like with this one, it's unexpected. Like, I think that they're gonna go in thinking that they know what's going to happen.
Mm,
But then as soon as, even when that first kill happens, or not the kill, but the first attack happens with the
yeah.
prostitute, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's going to like really get people in there.
100%. If not for the 80s aesthetic and the music or the actors who people will probably recognize, come for like the cat kills. Moving on now to Vamp from 1986.
Did you ever have one of those nights?
Hey, where are we going?
Doesn't matter. What counts is that you're my buddy.
My day didn't start off too well.
We be looking for ya.
Are we jumpy tonight?
And then it got worse.
We're here.
And then
Gentlemen, I give you Katrina. You're just what I'm looking for.
Why'd you pick on us?
It was a mistake. It was a little error there, a little communication error. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh. Let's just get out of here. This is not really happening.
Hello, baby.
God, you look awful. What happened to you?
I was nearly hung. I got into a fight with a psychotic albino. I hit a cockroach, my best friend disappeared, and then I'm nearly assassinated by a runaway elevator. Anyone can have an off night? This is fantastic!
Vamp, a comedy with bite. And of course, Grace Jones.
Had you seen this film before?
Yes.
How did you feel revisiting it?
I am still in love with it. I still think that it's phenomenal. You know, I really love 80s movies and I love vampire movies. And then together, this is unstoppable. Plus, Grace Jones, I feel like she's just a goddess sent from the heavens above to bless our lives with her being fabulous and fashionable. And it's like, I would really love to see her in more horror movies. Like, I know that she was like the last one that I remember seeing her in, she was in this, it was like this werewolf movie from the 2000s, but you know, she was like a woman, like the half woman, half man at a carnival, you know, like one as a performer. And it was like a made for TV movie. And, you know, it was actually pretty cool, you know, a werewolf movie called Wolf Girl. But I don't really feel like we were able to see her enough. And I just feel like she's just, again, she's just powerful. But no, I'm still very much still in love with it.
So let's talk about Grace Jones, because I feel like all of the posters of the movie that I've seen kind of put her front and center. And she's like the most memorable part of the film, for me at least.
Yes.
Like what do you, I mean, we've already said we love her. So what do you make of Katrina, the vampire? I think it's fair to say she's a vampire queen. Like at some point someone refers to her as a vampire queen.
Yes.
So what do you make of Katrina as the movie's main villain? Monster.
I thought she did like a great job. I kind of did want to see more of her. It was understandable as to why we didn't, though, because, you know, the whole storyline with these, you know, fraternity brothers or these guys trying to get into a fraternity, you know, just trying to get a stripper, you know, whatever. So that was pretty, it was understandable and stuff like that. They just basically just wanted a stripper to perform, you know, at a frat party in order to get approval and stuff like that. So then they also get this other guy, Duncan, who's, you know, he's kind of geeky and stuff, and they just want to use his car and everything. So when they do head off to this like extremely creepy, dark neighborhood in the bad part of town, it was kind of weird that someone, I feel like Katrina, because she's like upscale. So it's like, I feel like someone like that should be like grabbing like high-end clientele. Gosh, that sounds so horrible. But you know, but I mean, I guess in a way it makes sense because, you know, they kind of want to be, you know, basically, you know, they're vampires and everything, and they want to be able to like dispose of the bodies, and they don't want to have to worry about cops. So it makes sense. But I do feel like it was refreshing to see her in a role like this because she had like a very strong fashion background, and it was just unexpected to see her perform this way. Like, you know, she, to me, without even saying a word, she did a great job, like just with her eyes, with her movements, like just her, you know, body language. I believed her, you know, as Queen Vampire.
You kind of mentioned it. There's the fact that she doesn't actually have a single line in the film, and yet she's like the most powerful presence on screen. And when she comes out with that like red hair and that amazing makeup, and her entire body is made up as well, kind of like covered in like, you know, this white paint design. What did you make of like that performance in particular? I love the reaction shots of all the guys after she's done dancing, where they're like just there's like a whole minute of just speechless men just staring at her.
I love their reaction too. I'm sorry. sorry. Yeah, when I watched it, I laughed because they didn't know what to do, and it's just like,
Yeah.
but technically, she put on a show. It was very modern and artsy, and I mean, I don't see myself, not that there's anything wrong with this. I do not see myself performing the way Katrina performed. But if I were to, be in that kind of work, I would want to be just like Katrina. I don't want people to have words. I mean, she was really going at it too, but it was still, it was tasteful, even though it was sexual. Um, I don't know. I've never seen anything like that before. And then, like you said, with the red hair and then the body paint, and she had like the blue contacts. And what is happening? I don't know. But it was something that you just could not look away.
It was almost like she wasn't really made up like a stripper, because I think instantly of sort of Salma Hayek in From Dusk Till Dawn as another kind of,
Yes,
example of a vampire queen that's you know, dancing in a strip club. But that was very much like sexualized for a male audience. But this felt more like, you mentioned, like an art performance by Grace Jones.
right. And it's funny that with you mentioning Salma Hayek, From Dusk Till Dawn, because I've always felt that that movie was inspired, or at least influenced, by Vamp, because it kind
Yeah.
of has like a little, I see some similarities there.
Oh, for sure. Do you think so you think it is kind of inspired by it?
I think so. Like, I don't think that, not fully, because I know that it's a whole family, and From Dusk Till Dawn, but with the vampire queen, and it was like with Salma's performance, it was very artsy, but even though it was still like it's still sensual, it was still like attractive and everything. So I don't know. I just do feel like with Vamp, it is more it's more of a horror comedy. Like, it's just
Yeah.
definitely there. It's a very 80s movie.
Yeah. And kind of to dig in a little bit deeper into Katrina as kind of the main female monster, what do you think about her in her monster form? She's got this thing where her face transforms as well when she goes into vamp mode and when she attacks AJ. What did you make of her once the veil is lifted and she's shown in her true form?
It was very surprising. I was I was just expecting to see just, like the teeth, but then there was
Yeah.
something also, obviously, like her whole entire face changed. And the part that really, like, stood out for me, her toes. Like,
Oh,
she had
yes.
like the longest nails. Yeah, and like,
Yeah.
even like the way she was like rapping, like, she, for sure, for some reason, I thought it's very small, but I was like intrigued. When when we first saw what was going on, and we're looking at AJ with her and everything, it looked like with him, when he took off his socks, or she took his socks off with his shoe, she's like wrapping her feet around him. I guess maybe that's
Yes.
easier for her to like get to him. And then when they did like a different, like, wider shot, and when we were able to see like her toes, like the longness of the
Mm-hmm.
like the transformation in the face, it was just like, it wasn't just like a tooth, kind of like, oh, that little vampire tooth. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
you could see it in the gums, you could see it in like just like the whole, like her whole entire face. So
Mm-hmm.
I was really, I found that really surprising, because this is a comedy horror from the 80s. So I wasn't expecting her to be super scary. When I first watched it at the time, I think maybe I was like a teenager. This was like in the 2000s, early 2000s. And, I wasn't like scared, but it was just kind of like, like, cause it was surprising to see.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of funny, kind of in an 80s frat boy kind of way, but it's, yeah, the toes. I remember those as well. I was like, oh, Jesus, they're really like going for it. I mean, it's very Buffy-esque in a way because her face kind of goes into vamp mode when she's ready to attack, but it is it's very extended. Like, she spends a long
Hmm.
time biting that guy's neck and kind of really gnawing at it, which a literal definition of a snack, I think, in that film, where it's just like just getting into it. But
But I like that, though. Definition of a snack.
One thing that really struck me about the film, and kind of I wanted to pick you up on it, is kind of this idea of this being kind of very 80s. Like, it's also very neon. Visually, this film is pretty stunning. Like,
Yes.
every single simple scene is like lit in this beautiful neon way where, there's just green and pink and bright neon blue everywhere. Kind of, what did you think of the way that it sits with other 80s horror movies?
It's weird because it's set up like a traditional 80s horror, with the two, wannabe frat brothers, with the
Mm.
dialogue, with their clothes. You see that. But then what you were saying, even with the colors, it's just like, oh, that's a little artsy. It's a little, like, I felt like they did that for Katrina, for Grace Jones, because
Mm.
she's the queen, and she's like, not only is she powerful, but clearly she's a woman, a vampire of like a higher class, like she
Hmm.
probably comes from royalty. So I think that that's where the colors play along with it. And I don't know if it fully fits, because it is very much 80s. It's campy, but it's not always that way throughout the whole entire movie.
Mm.
Like, I see it with the guys, with Keith, with AJ, with Duncan. You can see it. But there's just something, I don't know, there's just something like they were trying to go like a different direction. Um
Hmm.
at one point I felt, but or at least make it more, visually appealing, and I feel like they did that. And I think that's why I really love it, just because even though it's funny, it's fun, I do feel like that's what makes it underrated, and like
Mm.
an underrated like vampire movie, if not, a cult classic. And I know that this movie is not perfect at all. There's a lot of flaws, but just because of, I feel like visually how it looks.
Yeah. Why do you think this film is kind of not as well known as other teen vampire 80s classics? Like, I'm thinking of The Lost Boys and Fright Night, which came out not exactly the same year, but around the same time.
I do think that is kind of strange, because it's not like the poster isn't appealing. So it's like, I'm not too sure. I think that maybe this is just one of the films that fell into the cracks, because even
Mm.
when you look at the cast, a lot of the cast members, you've seen them in, other horror, well, not horror, well, some of them has been horror movies, but you've seen them in
Well,
other
yeah.
80s movies.
Yeah. The guy who plays AJ.
Right. Like, I remember him from, what comes to mind is Weird Science. And, it's a popular movie, and I really enjoyed that movie. So I'm not too sure why. I think it was probably just one of those movies that fell into the cracks. And then even with Grace Jones, I know that she was big in the 80s.
Yeah, she just done, like, the year before, she had just released A View to Kill, the James Bond movie where she played Mayday.
Hmm.
So she was like at the peak, I think, of her popularity at that time. And what did you make of the ending?
I mean, I think it was like they were trying to give us like a happy ending. Even though I felt like with, AJ is he's still like a vampire. So
Mm-hmm.
but it just seems like with him and Keith, they'll still find a way to be friends, I guess. But I was kind of hoping that, you know, with Katrina, that she would somehow find a way to still be alive, just because perhaps they could have gone to, open up a club in Vegas. I was hoping that maybe they
Yeah.
would come back with some type of sequel.
What did you think of her death?
Okay, it, it kind of did make me laugh.
Yeah.
It kind of did just make me laugh. I'm not too sure. Maybe they were rushed, or I think that either either they were rushed, or maybe they just thought, oh yeah, let's keep in mind, let's keep it like funny. Because
Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't like a big fan of it. I wasn't scared. I laughed, and I feel horrible.
Oh no. I mean,
So,
I think like the moment where her like bones show the finger to the characters, I was like, this is playing for laughs. Like, it's just, there's no other way. I thought, like, she has to have the final word.
but that's what I mean. They could like really come back strong if they had like a sequel. And oh
Mm.
no, she's not dead. She's really alive, and they're in Vegas. But this time, she's not the main showrunner. She's still the queen. you know? But
Yes.
I don't know. It's just a thought.
I'm just imagining a sequel now. I would just like want to see a full feature length Vegas show that's just Katrina performing.
Right.
To start kind of wrapping up the convo about Vamp as well, kind of, do you think it's billed as a comedy horror, and kind of, do you think the horror works still, or do you think it sort of leans a bit more into the comedy side of itself?
I think that it depends because there are some scenes I feel like that's kind of scary. But for the most part, to be honest, because of I watch like a lot of horror movies, like for me, I feel like it is more of a comedy. But I do know of some people that would like genuinely be terrified if they watch something like this now.
What do you think are the truly scary bits? Maybe not for you and I, because we watch a lot of horror movies, but for what do you think are the bits that are still potentially really scary for horror fans today?
I think when Keith discovers AJ in the garbage
Mm.
disposal bin, because he's been spending the majority of the movie looking for his friend, and then there he is, and then he calls the cops, and when he's in the bathroom stall, and then there's like banging on the door, and then there his friend is. That's kind of scary because no, you saw him dead, like neck all ripped out. Like, come on, what kind of joke, is that? And then he's acting weird. So but of course you're not going to right away normal people or people who don't watch normal people who don't watch horror movies, they're not going to they're not going to think he's a vampire. But I would think like, no, there's something wrong. Like I saw you dead. Like, you know what I mean? Because he really did, like, he wasn't moving at all. He was probably cold. Like, come on. So I think that part can still, be a little scary for some people.
To finish off kind of our chat about both of these films, how do you think they kind of stand next to 1980s horror?
I feel like it's showing kind of that they're showing a different side of horror. Not only just with like the two powerful women,
Mm-hmm.
but even just how visually appealing they both are. 80s movies are known to be, cheesy and campy and, have that tone. Um, or just being like straight up horror, like killing and blood
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. But I feel like this, with them both, it's done in a very artistic way. And there's blood, there's killing, there's sex, but again, I feel like it's done in a different way. If that makes sense.
Zena, thank you so much for your time and for your insight on both of these films. It's been wonderful to chat to you. And can you let us know where people can find out more about your work?
Of course, and thank you again for having me. I hope that I didn't blab too long.
Not at all. Not at all. The perfect amount.
Okay, good. But you guys can find me at realqueenofhorror.com. It's my blog. I've been running it for 9 years, and I just, talk about a lot of horror movies that I love. Also, I'm on YouTube. You can just type in Real Queen of Horror, and I do a lot of top, 5, top 10 lists. I just love doing those. It's a lot of fun to yell in front of my camera. I'm always on Twitter, and my handle is Lovely Zena.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for another episode of the Final Girls podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. If you can, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you want to find out more about what we do, we are on thefinalgirls.co.uk, and you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at thefinalgirlsuk. You can also follow Zena on Twitter at lovelyzena, and I tweet a lot of inappropriate horror gifs at Anna B. Demented. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode where we'll be covering aliens.